So I had a lot of time on my hands over the last couple of weeks, as you could imagine. And so I thought about, what can I say to a room of roughly 1,000 people who drive innovation in one of the most dynamic sectors of healthcare, ophthalmology. And that's not easy because folks in this room, like Dan and Tom, who we just heard from, do remarkable things. And this is the engine, I think, that drives a lot of excitement. It drives a lot of activity. It drives better results for physicians. It drives better outcomes for patients. And so that's a really interesting dynamic when you think about the excitement this room represents. And so I thought I would take a step back and really think about where are we in eye care, right? I got involved in ophthalmology in 2010 when I became CEO of Bausch & Lomb. And because Bausch & Lomb was a 150-plus-year-old company at the time, and it was a turnaround, I spent a lot of time looking at the state of innovation in ophthalmology because one of the things we needed to do at Bausch & Lomb in 2010 was rebuild a pipeline. And it occurred to me that there were many golden ages of innovation in ophthalmology. And when I started to look at some of the factors that led to a golden age of innovation, it became clear to me that we are on the cusp of entering a new or next golden age of innovation in eye care. And the reason for that, I really believe, has to do with the market for eye care. I think it has to do with the ecosystem that exists within ophthalmology and eye care. And it has to do with where we are from a scientific or science standpoint. And I thought I would talk about each of those very quickly. So by no means is this exhaustive, and this is just a U.S. perspective, but it gives you a really good flavor. If this is happening in the United States, then the prevalence in the world is exponentially greater. And so when you look at what's happening in some of these disease states that Allergan focuses in, like glaucoma, retinal disease, and dry eye, these are very large problems in the United States. The proliferation of patients and the diseases are massive. And as you know, there are many more disease states in ophthalmology, and there are many more countries than the United States. But I think you get a sense that we're talking about millions and millions of people, tens of millions of people in this country afflicted with these diseases that are severe, that can lead to blindness, that can lead to a change in the quality of life. And as a result, there's a lot that we as an industry, as an innovation ecosystem, need to do to treat these. And ultimately, I'll show you that the science is really catching up here. When you look at the dollars in the United States of these markets and the growth that represents the opportunity for innovation in these markets, you can see very large growth rates. And for those of you that don't look at other areas of healthcare, we operate in 7 total areas. So we operate in 6 other significant areas of healthcare. You don't see numbers like this. You don't see growth rates of 26% or 20%. You tend to see more flat in other areas of healthcare. And so for us in eye care to have these types of market, yes, driven in many aspects by the number of people with affliction or disease, but it's really, truly remarkable. And a lot of this has to do with some of the technology that's starting to develop in some of these areas. And so let me talk about the second aspect, the ecosystem. We operate in ophthalmology in a very vibrant ecosystem. There are a lot of companies out there with stories similar to Dan and Tom's that are doing great things, that are taking great ideas, they're working with key opinion leaders, they're working with doctors, they're working with scientists, they're working with venture companies to bring those ideas to life. And there's some big companies in here too. And this logo page is just the companies that spoke or were represented at this meeting before I spoke. So it's not an exhaustive list. I just asked our guys to pick the logos from the companies that were speaking before I came on here. And so if I wanted to do all the logos of the people attending AAO here, we'd only talk about that, I'd flip probably 100 slides. So you can see that there is no shortage of companies that are looking at this space. And what's interesting, when you look at the number of venture-backed companies and the venture capital money pouring into the healthcare ecosystem, it is massive. The VC community, I think, Dan, you mentioned it in your speech, is helping bring these ideas to life. And it's not, this slide is not just eye care or ophthalmology, this is all of healthcare. But the amount of money going in is absolutely tied to the number of companies that are started. That's intuitive, that makes a lot of sense. But we are going into a period right now where they're at an all-time high, and the growth rate, if you can see at the very end of the curve, I don't have a laser, you can see the last few years, the growth has been exponential. And so that means a lot of great ideas are going to have an opportunity to become companies and to become real treatments and real products and real opportunities for physicians and ultimately patients. And that is really exciting. And so what also has changed is in this ecosystem is where these ideas come from. And so 15 years ago or so, 1998, most of these ideas came from big pharma. 62% of, these are drugs, NMEs, came from big pharma. Only about 14% of the great ideas, or NMEs, came from biotech and startup or venture-backed companies. Fast forward 15 years, and it changed dramatically. This is after $750 billion were spent by big pharma to go from 2/3 of the innovation coming from them to only 22. So think about that. They spent $750 billion to go from 60-some% to 22% of the innovation. And the reverse is that money that was pouring into venture-backed companies is where the ideas came from. 50% of the new drugs came from biotechs and startups during the last 15 years. And if I compiled the data for the last 3 years, you see the trend accelerating even more. And so when we think about how to tap into this ecosystem, right, how does Allergan or any of the other big pharma companies that are here want to tap into this ecosystem? We need to be at the center of it, right? We need to think about how do we build relationships with the entrepreneurs, with the key opinion leaders, with the customers, with the VCs, so that we can be the partner of choice, where we can be a magnet, I like to say, for all this great thinking, for all these great ideas. And yes, we do have discovery labs in Irvine, and yes, we invest in those discovery labs and we cherish them, but we're also very open to new thinking and new ideas. And we're not alone in that. I think that's not an original idea by us. And because of that, this ecosystem is starting to really flourish again. And that's why I think we're still moving. And so I talked about it, but the customer for us is at the center of our ability to be at the center of that ecosystem, right? One of the companies that we bought this year, Oculi, a Versant venture-backed company with an extraordinary entrepreneur, I learned about from being at ASCRS. I was meeting with a key opinion leader and in a one-on-one in our booth on the convention floor. And as he was getting up to leave, I said, "Hey, anything new?" He said, "Well, there is this one thing. We were doing this study, and I had to take the device away from a patient, and the patient cried. They didn't want to give the device back." I said, "Well, what device was it?" He said, "Well, it's this thing, Oculi. It's a electrostimulator for the nose that causes the tears to increase." I said, "Oh, that's pretty interesting." Well, about 3 one-on-ones later, I was asking the same question of another doctor, and he said almost the exact same thing. I said, "I got to find out about this Oculi thing." So I called Andy Corley, who was on the video, and I said, "You ever hear of Oculi?" He said, "Oh yeah, call Bill." And sure enough, I think it was only about 6 weeks later, we had a handshake on a deal, and we're very excited about that technology. But the moral of the story is, it's listening. It's thinking about good ideas, understanding how to tap into the venture community. And when we do that, right, when we go out and buy an Oculi, when we back an entrepreneur like Tom or someone else, that gives Bill Link and other venture capitalists confidence to go out and invest in the next one. because they had a success, they saw a return, they see a market for their ideas, and that's how we make this ecosystem work. And that's very exciting. So we have opened a concept at Allergan called Open Science, and the idea here is that it's not revolutionary, but it's this idea of tapping into this ecosystem. It's about being agnostic to where great ideas come from, recognizing we don't have a monopoly on the best thinking. We have some incredibly talented scientists, and we have a great and productive R&D organization. But we would love to see just as many ideas or more ideas come from all of you. And we want to be very approachable and very open-minded and not compete with your thinking, but learn from your thinking. And I always say that, when big companies look at outside ideas, they run them through the ringer. We do all sorts of evaluations, we push ourselves, we test ourselves, and we really give outside thinking very critical analysis and thought. But our internal ideas, we just approve them. And so the mindset that we have is that same critical thought that we applied to outside ideas, we should apply to inside ideas. Very practical. And that keeps us honest. And that keeps us focused on being agnostic towards the ideas, regardless of where they come, and why all of you who work in innovation every day are so vital to us because of this wonderful ecosystem. And so that's how we think about open science. It's not being for or against discovery, it's about being agnostic and just looking for how to source great thinking, great ideas, and to support the community. And so when we think about open science at work, and this is I think the really interesting part, I had mentioned the third reason I believe we're on the cusp of another golden age of innovation in eye care is because the science is really advancing. Our understanding of the eye, of the brain, of the biology of the human body is rapidly increasing. We in industry, in the pharmaceutical industry, always used to be about chemistry, right? We used to look at how do we solve disease through chemistry. And over the last few years, the human genome was mapped about 13 years ago. The output of that is a really better understanding of biology. And as you know, it takes 10, 15, 20 years for science to turn into products. And so as we're getting to the 13th, 14th year of really understanding the human genome and genomics and all the things that have really exploded as a result of some of that great understanding of biology, the science is starting to explode. And we're seeing great outcome and great understanding of biology. We're also starting to see the crossover of drugs and device. You're starting to see things that were big boxes like WaveTech, being reduced to simpler things. Technology, IT, everything is starting to merge together to create incredible opportunities for us. And so when we look at just some of the representative sample of partners that we have looked at, molecular partners for the DARPin platform, for a whole suite of biologic products to work in retina disease, Aquasys to change the way glaucoma can be managed in patients. Oculi I've already mentioned, and then Mometogen, a new molecular entity for dry eye. And so it's about tapping into this wonderful ecosystem of inventors with great ideas and working with customers to bring them to life. And so I'll end with our commitment to this space. Allergan was founded as an eye care company. It's an area of healthcare that I think is very special, even though I've only been involved with it for almost 5.5 years. I don't have the tenure of some of the folks that were mentioned in the last presentation, but I recognize how lucky I am to be a part of this wonderful ecosystem that really has a profound impact on people's lives. And so it's important for me to say that Allergan is absolutely committed to eye care. We are absolutely committed to our science and advancing our ideas, but also to all of you as innovators. And we want to be a vibrant part of this ecosystem. And we want to help shepherd through the next golden age of innovation as all of you work to bring great ideas to patients. So I thank you for your time, and I look forward to seeing you on the panel later today. Thank you.